What is the most important problem facing the country? We'll look at how many Americans mention something relating to the economy. Let's talk a bit about the economy today. We at Gallup have a variety of ways that we measure Americans' views of the economy. One of them is to look at the percent of Americans who mention something relating to the economy when we say, what's the most important problem facing the country? Right now, 23% of Americans mention something relating to the economy. That's roughly what it's been this year. It's actually a little lower last December and early January of this year. But the question is, what does this look like in context? Well, let me mention one thing before we look at some historic data. This question, most important problem, to some degree is a zero-sum question. In other words, if problem A is bothering you, you're less likely to mention problem B. Right now, the Iraq War is the dominant response we get when we say, what's the most important problem facing the country? So one of the reasons we may have fewer Americans mentioning the economy is it is drowned out, so to speak, at the current time by the war in Iraq. With that said, let's look back at some previous years in this decade. Right before 9/11, this was a poll we had in the field September 7th through 10, 2001, we had 39% of Americans who said something about the economy was the top problem facing the country, higher than it is now. Then those numbers went up. By May of 2003, over half of Americans said something about the economy was the most important problem. And even as recently as May of 2006, we had 40% of Americans saying that the economy was the top problem. Therefore, today's number is clearly lower than we measured previously in this decade. Let's go back in history a little further. One of the low points for mentions of the economy came in 1999. May of 1999, the middle of the dot-com boom, everybody was happy about the economy. Stock market was going up. It was booming, so to speak. Only 13% of Americans said something about the economy was the top problem then. Go back further, however, and you'll see one of the reasons why George H.W. Bush was not reelected to office. In August and September of 1992, 69% of Americans said something relating to the economy was the top problem facing the country. Let's go back further in time. October of 1980, Jimmy Carter trying to get reelected, running against Ronald Reagan. At that point, 52% of Americans said inflation alone was the top problem, coupled with another 14% saying something about jobs was the top problem. Finally, going back to August of '74, that's when Nixon was leaving, Ford was coming into the presidency. A whopping 77% of Americans said something relating to inflation alone was the top problem facing the country. Bottom line out of all of this, the 23% mentioning the economy today, really not high by historic standards. Coming up tomorrow, results of a new weekend Gallup poll. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, editor-in-chief of the Gallup poll with Democracy on Demand. Take the daily briefing with you. Search for Gallup at the iTunes Music Store.